It's a Syracuse basketball and football recruiting checkup here on Locked On Syracuse.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer, and thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day, and we're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And on today's show, we are joined by Neil Adler from Inside the Loud House to go over Syracuse basketball and Syracuse football recruiting. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. As playoffs wind down, the sport stops sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. All right, Neil, thank you for joining the podcast here on this Wednesday afternoon. Let's start off by talking about the recent news with Matthew Gilhooly. Now, I said that I was very, very surprised by his decision to not include Syracuse in his top 7 schools. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, first of all, Jackson, thanks for having me on. As always, appreciate it. And definitely not a dull summer so far in terms of Syracuse recruiting stuff. In terms of Matt, I guess the way I would characterize it is I didn't necessarily think that ultimately he would necessarily pick Syracuse as his school, but I was a little bit surprised that Syracuse didn't make his top 7. Matt's visited the Syracuse campus 3 times for the elite camp last August. He took an official visit in late September of last year, and then he visited with a couple other recruits in late February of this year on Jim Boeheim Day. Spoken highly of the program, for a long time. But as you know, his lead recruiter with the Orange was Jerry McNamara. And when Jerry left to be the head coach of Siena in the spring, there was an article, I believe, in the Philadelphia Inquirer not long after that saying that Matt was kind of resetting his recruitment as his top 3, unofficial top 3 at the time was long time schools that have recruited him: Syracuse, Washington, and Penn State, which is an in-state school for him and has offered him like 2 years ago. That had to do with, I believe, GMAC leaving for Siena, as well as Mike Hopkins being out at the coach at Washington. However, in, I believe, last month, there was a report that came out by, I think it was Brendan Jenkins with 247 Sports, saying that Syracuse was among the 4 schools that were still in the most contact with Matt at the time. Then in late June, about a week ago, a little over a week ago, during a Scholastic Live period where players were suiting up for their high school teams, and Matt plays for Penn Charter in Philadelphia, Autry was in the house for him at, I believe, DMB Live. Yep. So I think that GMAC leaving certainly hurt Syracuse, quote unquote, with Gilhooly's recruitment. But it did seem to me that with Autry in the house for him and them being in regular contact, that they were still trying to remain active and a significant player in his recruitment. So to wrap it all up, yes, when he disclosed his top 7 on Monday in the late afternoon, I believe, I was a little bit surprised that Syracuse didn't make the cut. I was also a little surprised that Penn State didn't make the cut.
Yep. And Neil, it's funny you mentioned that, Neil, because you cited that article that I've said here on the podcast about the 4 schools that were most in contact with Matthew Gilhooly. Of those 4 schools, only Alabama actually made his top 7.
It was the 2 others, and then Michigan, maybe. I think
Michigan was on there, Michigan for those 4 schools, and they didn't make the cut. It was just a very interesting top 7. It definitely was a curveball, in my opinion. Like you said, was Syracuse going to ultimately win out? Perhaps not. But I remember saying on the podcast that day before he announced it, if he announces 4 schools, I would expect that Syracuse were to make at least the top 4. He ends up releasing 7, and Syracuse didn't even make a top 7. And I'm like, wow, that just goes to show you how much really the whole Jerry McNamara leaving to Siena really just changed everything. Same with Washington and Mike Hopkins being let go from there. So
right. And the only other thing I'll say there, Jackson, is I don't know for certain, but we could certainly put out there that since mid-April, Syracuse has offered 2 other big men in the 2025
Right.
class. Elson from New York City was offered in mid-April. And then early last month, Chris Cenac Jr., who will play a senior at the Link Academy. So, I don't know the inner workings of conversations between Autry and the staff and Matt, but if those 2 offers that went out, maybe Syracuse is focused more on those guys. Maybe that, shied Matt away from Syracuse. Hey, listen, we wish him well. He's a 4-star big. He's a top 75 national prospect. He's a really good player. Again, I was a little surprised Syracuse wouldn't make a top 7, but I didn't necessarily think that they would win out for Matt, and maybe they're going all in on Chris per se. Brendan was in Turkey last week for Chris and Jordan Smith with Team USA. So it was a little bit of a surprise, but we wish him well and we move on.
Absolutely. We wish Matthew Gilhul nothing but the best in his recruitment, even though it didn't work out between him and Syracuse. But speaking of big men, of course, there are 2 that you mentioned, and I've mentioned here on this podcast, Chris Cenac Jr. and Asher Elson. How important do you think it is that Syracuse lands a big in its 2025 class?
Oh, I think it's a great question, a great discussion topic. I think it's important. Well, if you just look at the roster this year, right now, unless they add another one, they have 2 true centers. And if I believe, I hope I'm correct here, both of them will be gone after this season, right?
Yes.
Naheem will be a senior,
and Eddie are out of years of
eligibility. And Eddie will be gone as well. So, and they certainly could add another big, if it's not this offseason, which this offseason is pretty much wrapping up. They could certainly add a big man, a college transfer via the portal after the following season, 24-25. But again, with those 2 guys exhausting their collegiate eligibility, regardless of the portal, one way or the other, I think it's paramount that they add a high school level center for next season. And Asher is a fast rising prospect out of New York City, plays with South Shore in Brooklyn. And Chris, is arguably the hottest prospect in 2025, short of Acaden Lewis, who we're going to talk about here in a little bit. But he's got tons of offers, all over the place. He's blowing up. He's playing for Link in the EYBL Scholastic as a senior. With Chris, the key is to get him on campus for a visit. And I do believe right after he got his offer in early June from Syracuse, Mike McAllister, our good friend, he did have an article about Chris saying that there seems to be some interest level between the staff and Chris about a visit, but we'll see. He's got so many suitors, but they will have to get him on campus for a visit if they have a shot.
Yeah, and I also want to clarify something here for the audience regarding Chris Cenac, because people might be saying right now, well, why didn't Syracuse get in sooner on this kid? Well, here's why. If you go look at his profile online, about a year ago, he wasn't even ranked anywhere. Chris Cenac is the number 6 player in the country, and a year ago, he was not ranked anywhere. So this is about as fast rising of a prospect as you're going to get. So it's hard to find that diamond in the rough type of player who is not ranked anywhere and then all of a sudden gets into the top 10. So if you really want to look at it, pretty much everyone that's getting into the party is quote unquote late to the party. And as far as Chris Cenac, I mean, he would be the dream. I said this yesterday. That's not a consolation prize to Matthew Gilhul. This is the number 6 player in the country. If you land Chris Cenac somehow, if you can land him, then in the transfer portal next year, you just need a backup big man. That's all you need. Just a backup big. It doesn't seem that too difficult to get, a backup big. And if you land Asher Elson, that would be nice. But I don't think Elson, as of right now, just looking at his recruiting profile, he would be ready to be a day 1 center starting in the ACC. So you'd probably be looking at getting a starting center. I do think, to your point, it's super duper important that Syracuse can at least land one of these guys, at least one big man, just so that the Orange don't have to recruit 2 of them next year in the transfer portal. We did get some news this morning regarding 4-star point guard Acaden Lewis, another fast rising prospect here. He is a DMV guy, and obviously DMV guys in Syracuse go pretty well together. He released his top 8 schools. I will give out the top 8 right now. Neil, you are aware of it. Syracuse made the cut alongside Tennessee, UConn, Kentucky, Michigan, UNC, Duke, and Auburn. Yeah, that's about an elite of an 8 as you're ever going to get in recruiting. Yeah. That's all the blue bloods pretty much there. That's about it. That's insane. That elite. I have like no words. I saw the 8 this morning drop, and I'm like, Neil, what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah. Well, we could have a debate about which schools are blue buds these days in college basketball. Certainly, historically, in
Duke, UNC, Kentucky, UCLA, UConn.
Okay, I would throw Kansas in there.
Kansas.
And he did have an offer from Kansas, but Kansas did not make his top 8. My thoughts are that obviously, hey, listen, it's always better to be on a final list than not on a final list. I was not surprised about some of those blue bloods on there. He is a unbelievably fast riser in the 2025 class out of Sidwell Friends in DC, and Team Durant just played unbelievably well on the AAU circuit this spring, as well as at other showcases. As recruiting services have updated their national rankings for 2025, he's made humongous jumps into the top 40 in some places. I wrote the other day that he should be a top 25 5-star player, and he could end up being that. He had a great junior year at Sidwell Friends. They were nationally ranked, won a couple of titles in the DMV. Right after he released his top 8, but prior to us hopping on here, I put out a couple feelers to a couple analysts regarding Syracuse and their shot, and a couple have gotten back to me so far, and one said, hey, listen, they got a shot, they're in the top 8, but I wouldn't necessarily characterize them as a front runner, and that's logical. And then someone else, a national expert, got back to me and said, hey, listen, a couple of schools that Acaden had previously visited, whether officially or unofficially, didn't make the cut. Syracuse, he hasn't visited yet, did make the cut. And it's going to come down to visits and that sort of thing, which I tend to agree with. Do I think Syracuse is going to win out? I think it's going to be tough. Do I think they have a shot? Absolutely. Acaden has said on more than one occasion lately that he really appreciates how hard he's being recruited and the regular contact he's getting from the Syracuse staff. As you mentioned, Autry and Brendan Strawn and Dan Engelstedt, they have tremendous connections in the DMV, so they have a shot. And there was one article that came out right after this top 8 that said Acaden plans to officially visit all those schools, and I've heard in the past that he does plan to visit Syracuse. So, we'll see how it all shakes out. Again, to make the top 8 is great. To try and beat a Kentucky, a UConn, a Duke, those types of school, North Carolina. I mean, that's a lot to ask, but let's see what happens. I mean, again, those DMV connections are really huge, and he goes on an OV to Syracuse and it goes really well. They got a shot. He is a tremendous prospect. And kind of like Chris, maybe a little bit of a late bloomer, or just like surging more recently. Yeah. I mean, he was ranked by some places, some recruiting services in the top 100, earlier this spring or even in the last year. But now he's just vaulting up the charts, and so you've got all these blue bloods after him, and it's nice to be in that category. So kudos to Red and the staff, and let's see how this goes.
Absolutely, and also regarding Acaden Lewis, it's very nice and encouraging to actually make the top 8, and he hasn't even visited campus yet. I know you said, according to your sources, that they're not among the favorites of those top 8. I wonder if that could possibly change, because they made the top 8 and they haven't gotten a visit from him.
Absolutely.
So what happens if he comes to campus? I wonder how much that would influence the odds.
Sure.
Sadiq White is already in the boat, so that's nice. Sure. Maybe he can get in on the recruiting trail. All I'm saying there.
Mm-hmm.
Could.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Kiyan Anthony maybe come to too. Mm-hmm. I mean, all of a sudden, there is a recruiting sales pitch here where it's like, hey, Acaden will not be the only one if he decides to come to Syracuse. Obviously, with the other schools involved, he wouldn't be the only one that those schools are going to get either. But he can at least go to Syracuse. At least Syracuse, in all likelihood, will be in somewhat equal playing field in terms of he won't be the only guy coming. They already got Sadiq White. Kiyan Anthony, it's highly possible that he commits to Syracuse.
Sure.
Maybe they can get a big man too. So you're looking at possibly a 3 to 4 person class in the class of 2025. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. And if you're itching for football season like I am, guess what? FanDuel has released the odds for Syracuse's first game against Ohio. The Orange are 15.5-point favorites to get the W. You think the Orange are going to cover? Well, bet it right now on FanDuel. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel program for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the streaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yeah, it's a great point, Jackson, and you're totally right. Like I said earlier, Acaden had taken a couple official and unofficial visits to several schools, none of which I believe, I hope I'm not wrong here, but or the vast majority of those schools that he had previously visited, much earlier on, are on his top 8. He has in recent weeks unofficially visited UConn, Kentucky, and North Carolina. I believe he's got an OV set up to North Carolina for later this year. But yeah, to make the top 8 and not have a visit yet is an encouraging sign. Syracuse was in for him in late May on the EYBL circuit during the live period. During that Scholastic live period in late June, they were in for him when Sidwell Friends was playing, I believe, at Philly Live. So they're in regular contact. They're pursuing him hard. I believe he will visit at some point. And if that visit goes really well, and like you said, you got Sadiq in the fold, maybe some others, they got a shot. Absolutely. I wouldn't necessarily say is there a front runner for him right now? I mean,
I haven't seen any.
I don't know. I mean, there's no analyst predictions out there, and there shouldn't be, because he's got a top 8 and he's got to take these official visits, but they're right there. Let's see how it goes. Hey, listen, Sadiq White, he took 2 unofficials, but didn't even take an official and then verbally committed. I assume he'll take an official to Syracuse at some point. But they've got 1 5-star. Acaden's trending towards 5 stars. You mentioned Kiyan and some of these other guys. There's definitely momentum in the 2025 class, even with Matt not putting them in his top 7. So we'll see.
How important do you think it is that Syracuse lands Kiyan Anthony here?
Man, this is like the most discussed and maybe over-discussed topic in recent months. We're
all just itching for it.
Among fans on social media and chat rooms, among national analysts on various recruiting websites that I've talked to or just put their own stuff out there. There was one earlier this week. I think it was Jason Jordan from Rivals, but is he a must get? What would it mean? If he doesn't come to Syracuse, is that a bad look? I would certainly say that Syracuse is one of the leaders for him right now. He's taken 2 official visits to Syracuse and Florida State. He said multiple times lately that he's going to take more visits in the coming months, including possibly visiting both Syracuse and Florida State again.
Yep.
But yeah, you've got other schools in there, whether he's mentioned Arizona State and Auburn, and
I think Ohio State too.
Ohio State, yep. Indiana has been after him for a while. Indiana's head coach Mike Woodson coached Carmelo with the Knicks. So again, I don't think it's a lock that he's coming to Syracuse, but I do think they have a really good shot. And the other thing I'll say here, I'm going to say this so I'm blue in the face, and some people have certainly expressed that they adamantly disagree with me here. If Kiyan Anthony decides that he just wants to go somewhere else because he wants to carve out his quote unquote own legacy, that doesn't. So he picks another school. I don't think that looks badly on the Syracuse staff. I mean, if he just decides it's not for him, what are they supposed to do? I mean, they can pitch, come to Syracuse, follow in your dad's footsteps, compete for a title. We got Sadiq here, maybe some others, and that's a great pitch. And he loves Syracuse and he loves the staff. But if he just decides that somewhere else is a better fit, I mean, I guess some people would say that the optics don't look great, but it is what it is. I mean, I will say till I'm blue in the face, until there's like 20 million analyst projections for Syracuse for Kiyan on recruiting websites, I don't think it's a sure thing. I don't think it's a lock. Do I think they need to get him? No. And he's a legit top 30 national prospect. He's not, up there in the rankings because he's Melo's son. He's really good. He played really good at a showcase earlier this summer. He's played really well in the EYBL circuit with Team Melo, in the spring. He deserves those rankings, and I think he'll have a really good senior year at Long Island Lutheran in the EYBL Scholastic. I think it'd be important for Syracuse to land him given all the context, but I don't think it's an absolute necessity. I don't think the sky would fall down to the earth to land if they didn't land him, so to speak. But it would sting. I mean, how can it not sting? I mean, come on. So we'll see.
It would definitely sting.
Yeah.
But I mean, people will say it's bad optics. You can think all you want about it, but Arch Manning isn't playing at Tennessee or Ole Miss. He's playing at Texas. So players go wherever they want as long as their parents aren't telling them you have to go to this school. They're going to carve out their own path, and it happens to be the same school as their father or their mother, then so be it. But I think the importance of it is more along the lines of, well, he is also an elite prospect. And if you were to get a guy like Kiyan Anthony, you pair him with Sadiq White. Now all of a sudden, like Syracuse, all it needs is like one more 4-star recruit, and you're looking at a top 10 class in the country. You get 2 more 4 or 5 stars in there. Now you're looking at a top 5 recruiting class in the country. And it's like almost as if, to me, like Kiyan Anthony is like that next domino to fall. It's like, even though you're saying it's not a sure thing, and I agree with you, it's not a sure thing, they're still the favorite for him. I mean, Joe Tipton logged that prediction in there. I mean, he's a reliable source. He's Joe Tipton. He said Syracuse is the favorite for him right now. I mean, things can still change. It's just that next domino to fall. It was like Sadiq White was the first one, and then Kiyan Anthony could be like the second one, and then all of a sudden it could just be like all the way down, but I mean down in like a good way in terms of dominoes, in terms of maybe it's Asher Elson after that, or London Jemison after that, or Acaden Lewis after that. I mean, it's just, hopefully it works in our favor for Kiyan Anthony, but he's going to make the decision that's ultimately best for himself.
Amen.
Let's move on to some football recruiting here.
Let's do it.
And the big one, 4-star edge, CJ May, is making his decision on July 13th. So that's 3 days from now at the time of this recording. He's got 4 finalists, and Syracuse, once again, is in that final conversation. Fran Brown and company, they are making headwaves on the recruiting trail. Even if they're not landing all the prospects, they are at least getting in those top 4s like they were for Malik Washington. The top 4 for CJ May, in case you have missed it, are Syracuse, Auburn, Louisville, and Washington. He is from Alabama, by the way, but he did mention that it's not much of a factor in terms of geography in his recruitment. Where do you see Syracuse in the race right now for CJ May, and how encouraging is it that Syracuse is at least in the top 4 for him?
Again, as we were talking about before we officially came on, I think that Syracuse, Fran Brown, and the staff getting, being named to the final lists of these elite 4 stars. I believe CJ's is a top 150 national prospect per at least 247 Sports. It's better to be on those lists than not. Now, obviously, when you're on that list and then you don't win out, that stinks a little bit, but that's recruiting. Can't win them all. The thing with CJ May is he took an official visit to Syracuse in mid-June, and he posted all these awesome social media things, and he had a great visit. He told Mike McAllister, I believe at least at that time, that Syracuse was on top. Now, I will say, and I wrote about this earlier this week, that there's multiple analyst predictions on multiple recruiting websites right now for Louisville. So Louisville seems to have the most buzz right now. Does that mean they're going to win out? It probably does, but it's never a guarantee. Let's remember, right before Judah Mintz was set to decide, DePaul had all the analyst buzz, and then he picked Syracuse. So, but, when there's multiple projections coming in and they're from, well-known analysts, they're usually going to be right. So I would say Syracuse, I kind of thought after his official visit, and then when Louisville started picking buzz, I thought maybe it was going to come down to Louisville and Syracuse. I'd say that probably is still the case, but I ultimately do expect him or anticipate him to pick Louisville, and that would be a bummer. But again, they're right there for these great players, and they're going to win some and they're going to lose some, and who knows, maybe the buzz will change in the next couple of days. But as it stands right now, it looks like CJ May is headed to the Cardinals.
Yep. I was looking at the same stuff you were looking at.
Yeah.
That it seems like he's going to go to Louisville, but we never know.
You never fully know.
So CJ, if you are, still making your decision, you still don't know, and you're watching this podcast, I mean, Syracuse is a great place to be. That's all I'm saying. I know everyone talks about the weather being really bad at Syracuse, but first of all, you're playing in a dome, so it's not going to be snowing.
Right.
And second of all, it's actually very nice in the fall. So
spring and fall, man.
Yeah, it's nice in Syracuse in the spring and the fall. I mean, yeah, the winter does suck, but I mean, doesn't the winter suck everywhere except for like Florida? I mean, that's where I'm from. But
I was talking to someone about that. Not to digress, but I was talking to someone about that on our Facebook page the other day when mentioned. This fan mentioned, it's tough to land recruits because of the weather in Syracuse. And I said, I don't know. I don't know. They pick up the snow really quick. I live in the DMV area, and if we have 2 inches here, they declare a state of emergency. So, yeah, it's a little gloomy and there's snow, but it gets picked up. I didn't miss one day of class. I didn't have one day of classes canceled due to snow in 4 years at Syracuse in the late 90s. So, I don't know.
Well, now with Zoom, there is no missing class anymore. A snow day is just a Zoom day, and every place in the United States has their regional pros and their regional cons. I mean, you can go out to California, you can go out to the Pacific Northwest, but you got to deal with all the earthquakes potentially. I'm just saying. You got the Midwest, and you're in Tornado Alley. You got the South, and I know there's no snow in the South, but let me tell you, right now it's about 100 degrees in Florida with humidity. So it's not fun to be in Florida right now. You don't want to be there. Yeah. And yeah, Syracuse, the winter does kind of suck, but at the same time, you're playing in a dome. So it shouldn't be that big of a deal. So CJ, I hope you're listening, and I hope that you are still strongly considering Syracuse and being part of the new era.
What did Jim Boeheim say many moons ago? Syracuse is like a beautiful place to live, like 9 months out of the year, and then the other 3 months there's basketball indoors or something like that. So it's
the basketball is played indoors. I mean, no matter where you go, you're playing basketball indoors unless you're playing on that aircraft
carrier, man.
Football, I mean, some places you will be playing outside a lot, but at least in Syracuse in December, you're going to be playing inside the dome, so you don't have to worry about cold weather.
Right.
But got to be honest, I feel like it would be honestly more of a home field advantage if they didn't play inside of a dome when it was super cold outside. I mean, imagine if
opposing teams not used to that.
Because think about the regular season finale this year is against Miami.
They're not used to that.
It's Miami. Imagine in December, they can't open the dome roof, obviously, but imagine if it was open and now like Miami from warm weather and everything has to go into the cold of Syracuse in December. I mean, that could help.
That could. I don't know if that would drive down attendance some, but
oh, come on. It wouldn't drive down attendance. The city of Buffalo goes to all their games in December and January. They're not complaining. In fact, they're jumping on tables when it's 10 degrees outside. I think it would be fun.
Completely fair.
I think it would be fun. There are ways to make it. Is this my campaign for no longer having a dome? No, I'm just saying I think it would be pretty fun if we had a snow game in Syracuse once in a while. Just play the game on like the soccer field.
There you go. All right. Sounds good.
Another recruit that they are supposedly in on is 5-star Rivals wide receiver Winston Watkins, and this is admittedly going to be a tough one to get. Yeah. He did release his top 16, and Syracuse did make the top 16, so it's like that saying. You're saying there's a chance with Winston Watkins, but I mean, Neil, this doesn't seem like a recruit that Syracuse is going to get.
Yeah, as I said, when he disclosed that top 16 on July 4th, wow, it's very cool to be in that top 16. Better to be on the list than not. But I mean, does Syracuse have a significant chance at winning out? Probably not. But again, you never know how things, can ebb and flow in recruiting. And he did unofficially visit Syracuse in March, and it went well. And again, he's got them in his top 16. Ole Miss has buzz.
They might. Sorry to cut you off here, but I think he might have been there for the spring game. I think I heard from someone he was there.
thought it. I'd have to go back and check. I'm pretty sure it was he visited in March.
Yeah, I maybe it was a different recruit that I'm mixing up, but there was some high-profile recruit.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah, they had a ton
game. It might have been Winston Watkins, but I'm not entirely
sure. I don't 100% remember. I know he visited in the spring, and I know it went well. And I know there was a report at the time, an interview. I don't know if it was with Winston or his dad or someone in his family, but saying that Syracuse was pitching him to come here and be a legend. Which, 5-star top 20 national prospect. Yeah, that sounds good to me. I don't think Syracuse will win out. He's officially visited South Carolina, Indiana, and Ole Miss. Ole Miss has buzz on recruiting sites. We'll see if he takes more visits. If Syracuse can land an OV from him, that would say something to me. But as it stands right now, I don't think Syracuse will necessarily prevail. But again, it shows kind of like the level being taken up a notch by Fran and his staff, that they're even remotely being considered for someone of his stature. Again, he's the number 2 wide receiver in the entire class and number 17 nationally per Rivals. He's lower elsewhere, but he's still an elite recruit. And to just be even in the mix, quote unquote, I mean, top 16, that's a big list. Usually don't see the list that big. It's usually top 10 or 10 or less. But hey, kudos to the staff for being in the mix. And like I said, let's see if they can get him on campus for an official visit.
Yeah, hopefully they can. But if they don't, I mean, they're probably not going to land him. But even then, to your point, I mean, that's the optimism now.
Right.
It's now the line has shifted, and I don't know if people have necessarily realized it, but the line has shifted when it comes to football recruiting. It used to go from, Syracuse would send out an offer to some elite recruit, but there's no chance. They're just sending out an offer to send out an offer.
Right.
Now it is they're actually getting in the lists, and we're starting to get bummed if they don't land them.
I know.
That's much better than what it used to be. I would rather get in the conversation, because you got to get in the conversation first before you can actually start landing these kids. Before, they were never in the conversation with some of these elite recruits. I mean, they would get, 1 or 2 big-time recruits. I know Tommy DeVito was a big-time recruit when they got him, and they've gotten other 4-stars in the past, but it's like maybe it would be like 1 in a recruiting class. Sometimes it would just be none. I mean, their last recruiting class under Dino Babers, and this is no disrespect to Dino Babers. And by the way he handled everything on his exit was first class. It was top notch.
He's a classy dude.
Yeah.
He's a classy guy.
But the criticism with him was recruiting. I mean, they were, I believe, 88th overall in the country in 2023. I mean, that's not good. I mean, I listed some of the schools they were behind. I mean, like Buffalo and Eastern Washington, not Eastern Michigan. Like, really? Like, how can you be behind those schools in recruiting? So the line has certainly shifted.
Yeah.
They're at least getting in the conversation. And now I think this leads to a more broader discussion here. And I've talked about it on the podcast. When you look at 2025 and you go to 24/7 Sports, Syracuse does not have a 4 or 5 star in the class. Right. They don't. Objectively, I am speaking a fact. Go on 24/7 Sports. They don't have a 4 or 5 star in there. They do, however, have a top 35 class in the country. And they do have the second most total commits in the country at 28. They're only behind Rutgers, which I believe Rutgers is also killing it on the recruiting.
They are killing it.
I don't know if people are talking a lot about that, but they're killing it. And they've beaten Syracuse on a couple of guys like
they have.
There.
Yep.
But still, I mean, why do you think that is, Neil? Why do you think it's because in 2026, they've gotten these elite 4-star recruits, but in 2025, they haven't necessarily been able to seal the deal. Why do you think that is the case?
I think it's a couple things, and you're right. They've got, I believe, 28 verbal commits in 2025 right now. They're a top 25 national class on Rivals. 247 Sports has them like 30 something, top 35.
Yep.
And the second highest number behind Rutgers. Boo, Rutgers. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, 29 to 28. It's pretty
right, close. Right. Well, yeah. I think part of it is, with 2025s and these are all verbals at this point. They can't, they have to sign national letters of intent before it's binding. But, Fran Brown was officially introduced as the team's head coach in early December of last year and started to bring his staff on board. A couple, guys remained, but then, a lot of new staff members. And so some might say that in terms of 2025 recruiting efforts, maybe they were starting a bit later in the game than a lot of other programs. To me, yes, and none of their 2025 pledges right now are 4 stars or 5 stars, not just on 247 Sports, but I'm pretty sure on Rivals or on 3 as well.
I think Luke Carney is like the quarterback.
Luke Carney is a 4-star at Rivals.
He's the biggest outlier. And this is no disrespect to Luke Carney, but Rivals has him as like one of the best quarterbacks in the country.
Top 25 quarterback.
Yeah, and then everywhere else, he's a 3-star recruit. I'm not calling him like bad or anything, but Rivals is the outlier there.
Right.
And so I'm like, all right, let me go look on 247 Sports. Let me go look at the composite rankings.
Right.
All right, so they're saying he's a 3-star. Okay, he's mostly a 3-star. Rivals is the outlier, but
okay. Well, here's what I'll say. Number one, I use recruiting rankings all the time in articles.
Yes.
All the time. Number two, you have to take them somewhat with not a grain of salt, but
yes,
their rankings, they're subjective. Luke Carney's thrown for 10,000 yards in 3 years. He's won 3 state titles, 100 and something touchdowns, or it's 15 interceptions. That's pretty good. So like we were saying before we came on, let's see if some of these recruits, if they have really good senior years and get evaluated at other camps or other events, they can move to 4 stars.
Absolutely.
And if they don't, so be it. I think Fran Brown and his staff he's known for his recruiting prowess. And even if he's not getting 5 stars like he was at Georgia, Syracuse is a program on the rise in terms of buzz, but they haven't shown anything. It's not their fault, but they haven't played a game yet with this new staff and the new program. So they've got all these, promising recruits, verbal pledges in 25. I don't think they're going to win out for CJ May, and they got a couple other guys in the mix, and Watkins. I don't think they're necessarily, but they've got a nice class, and maybe some of them are diamonds in the rough, and they got a lot of athleticism and speed at various positions, and it's still a promising class to me. But as we've talked about before, maybe 2026 is really one to really hone in on, because again, with 25, maybe they're getting a late start, and then if they're faring well on the field this coming season, maybe that gets them noticed a bit more with the 2025 class. They could get maybe some more pledges, although their class is already really big. But in 2026, they've already got 3 guys that are all 4 stars, and they'll be adding more presumably in the coming, months or whatever. So I think 2025 is a good class. Am I concerned that none of them are 4 stars other than Luke on Rivals? No, not really. If they perform on the field in this 2024 season, the recruiting will continue to keep going up and up. And so let's just see. It's a nice class, and let's see how they fare on the field and what that does with recruiting, elevating recruiting in 25, 26, and beyond.
I 100% agree with you. And the thought that just came in my mind is, what is the worst case scenario in the class of 2025? What's the absolute worst case in 2025? So it stays about the same. They have close to 30 total commits, which would still be very, very high in the country. I don't know if it would be second in the country, but it would be very high. So they would have a deep class. You need depth in football. It's not like basketball where, you can have 1 or 2 in your recruiting class and that's all you really need. In football, you need a lot of players. You need bodies. There's going to be injuries. It happens to every team every single season. So at least you're going to have bodies. All right. And they'll end up, worst case, minimum in the top 50. Just on sheer volume, they'll end up in the top 50 in the country. how many times were they top 50 in the Dino Babers era? Like maybe once, if I'm not mistaken, they were in the top 50.
Yeah.
So worst case scenario, Fran Brown and his staff in the class of 2025 will be top 50 in recruiting. That's the worst.
The worst.
Absolutely. And the best case scenario is by December 5th, which is the early signing period.
Right.
They're 7-2, 8-2, or whatever, and they're doing really well. And all of a sudden, oh, wait a minute. Maybe some of their prospects have upgraded to a 4-star, or maybe some guys that, made their decisions. I'm not saying that they're going to flip, but what I am saying is like, maybe there will be some momentum for players to flip, because flips do happen at the early signing period. They happen all the time. They happen to every single school. It can work for and against Syracuse. So I think the main key for Syracuse right now, build relationships. The two main keys: build relationships. Let me get it on camera. Build relationships and win.
Yep.
That's what you got to do. You build relationships with these kids, and then you start winning on the field in 2024. Maybe you're starting to look at the best case scenario in the class of 2025, and you can continue growing 2026. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Day is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Day now available on the free Fire TV channels app. Before I let you go, Neil, I just want to maybe have a little bit of a quick conversation about Oronde Gadsden. I don't know how much you are involved with Madden or the new NCAA football game, but Oronde Gadsden is the only player that made the top 100 overall in the country over on NCAA Football 25. He was ranked, I believe, 91 overall, and he was a 91 overall, and I believe he's 69th overall in the game. So what are your thoughts on Gadsden?
Well, first of all,
do you play a lot of Madden?
I don't. I did when I was a teenager. Played all kinds of video games. I have an 8-year-old son now, so my video games are more about like Mario Kart and other games like that. So
I know plenty of people my age who still play Mario Kart.
I love Mario Kart. Let me tell you how much I played.
One of the great video
Mario Kart in Syracuse freshman year at the dorms, day hall. Played it a lot. I mean, and there's obviously all kinds of stuff about the new college football game, and it sounds like it's going to be just fabulous. So, but no, I don't specifically play those games as much. No, I think it's cool that Oronde's in it. It's better to be on a list than not. I mean, do I take much stock in it? Do I really care all that much? No, I think the larger thing to me with Oronde is, and he's been included on some other lists in terms of preseason All ACC or preseason national top, whatever, 100 players. Coming off an injury last year, he didn't play much, but was a preseason All-American candidate. And the year before in 22, he was first team All ACC. I think, assuming, and it sounds like he's fully healthy, I think we can expect big things out of him, and that would be awesome. And I've said this before in articles or just whatever conversations. If the Syracuse football, if the offensive line holds up with Kyle McCord and knock on wood, he stays healthy with Oronde and all the other tight ends, receivers, the Quint and the other running backs, they could have a really dope offense, really fun offense. And Oronde will be a leader of the team. And I think he's going to be fabulous this year, again, assuming he's healthy and the offense is clicking. So those rankings don't surprise me. If he wasn't on the rankings list, I wouldn't, throw my arms up in the air, but he's got buzz ahead of this year, so he should have a good year.
Yeah, it's nice. And if he didn't make the list, or if nobody made the list or whatever, and you're all up in arms about it, well, if you purchase the game, I got news for you. You can change the ratings if you disagree with them. Like you can go in and manually change them if you want. I would do that all the time when I used to get all the Madden games. I'd be like, how's that player this? And I used to be one of those people that would freak out about it. And then I just came to a realization one day. I was like, wait a minute. I can just buy the game and change it. I can change it. Oh, I think they rated my players too low or whatever. Okay, I change it. You think Kyle McCord should be in the top 100? That's great. I think he should be too. Go ahead and change the rating. Go make his throw power a little bit more or something like that. I promise you, he'll go up a few overalls, and if that makes you sleep at night, then have fun. But I thought it was just cool to mention Arande because he made the top 100 and
Absolutely.
he was the Syracuse one that made it. And I think he's going to have a huge year. I think he's going to have, if he stays healthy, 1,000 yards pretty easily. I mean, there's a lot of weapons on that offense, but Arande Gadsden's the number one weapon.
Absolutely.
And you have to get him the ball if you want to win. And I'm assuming they want to win. So get him the football as much as you can. And I think he's going to have a big year.
Yeah, and just to, quickly on that, opposing defenses might be honing in on him as their number one, concern, quote unquote. But with all those other weapons at receiver, tight end, wide receiver, LeQuint coming out of the backfield,
and keep your eye on Yassine Willis, that power back, right?
Yeah, he's they've got a lot of options. So you double team or spend too much time focused on defending Arande, you're going to open up other guys. So hopefully he will have space to maneuver. And I agree with you. I could definitely see him getting 1,000 yards this year. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, Neil, thank you so much for taking the time.
Appreciate you, Jackson. Thanks, man.